are one of the most perceptive people in any room you enter. And it has made your life harder, not easier. That is the contradiction. The same mind that sees 3 moves ahead in every situation is the one that cannot stop seeing them. The same capacity that lets you anticipate consequences others haven't imagined is the one that runs those consequences at 2 in the morning when you are supposed to be sleeping. You think more than almost anyone around you. And you have been told, for most of your life, that this is precisely your problem. The advice is always the same. Slow down, breathe, be present, quiet the noise. It is correct advice, for a different kind of mind. Applied to yours, it is like telling a river to stop flowing. The river does not have a volume problem, it has a channel problem. And no one has ever shown you where to dig. William James, who in 1890 published The Principles of Psychology, the most thorough investigation of conscious thought that had ever been attempted, would have recognized your mind immediately. Not as a disorder, as a specific cognitive type with capacities most people never develop, the ability to inhabit multiple perspectives simultaneously, to detect patterns inside complexity that reads as noise to others, to anticipate second and third order consequences before the first one has even landed. James discovered that the line between the mind paralyzed by its own intensity and the mind that converts that same intensity into real analytical power is not the quantity of thought. It is whether that thought has structure, direction, and somewhere to arrive. By the end of this video, you will know how to tell the difference between rumination and reasoning, and how to move from one to the other in real time. You will know how to use your attention as a precision instrument instead of letting it use you. You will know how to externalize the loop, how to turn the spiral inside your head into something you can actually read, navigate, and act from. And you will understand, in concrete terms, what it looks like to redirect the capacity you already have toward decisions, problems, and insights that other people simply cannot reach from where they stand. You are not thinking too much. You have never been shown how to think in a way that matches what your mind actually is. That changes here. Suppression is not removal. Every attempt to quiet an intense mind through sheer force of will does not eliminate the thinking. It pushes it below the threshold of conscious control, where it continues running without your input or direction. This is not a personal failure. It is a structural feature of how thought works. William James spent years mapping the actual mechanics of conscious experience, and what he found demolished the assumption that thinking happens in neat, separable units. In The Principles of Psychology, he introduced the concept that would define his legacy: the stream of consciousness. The mind, James argued, does not produce thoughts the way a printer produces pages. One discrete output at a time, clean edges, nothing bleeding into the next. It flows. Every thought arrives already surrounded by what he called a fringe, a halo of felt relations, of half-formed connections, of directions the thought is already leaning before you have consciously decided where to take it. The fringe is why a single word can carry an entire emotional atmosphere. It is why you walk into a room and immediately sense something is wrong before you can name what it is. It is the thing that makes your mind feel like it never fully stops, because it doesn't. The stream does not pause between thoughts. It moves. For most people, this stream flows at a manageable pace, with a narrow fringe. Connections are loose, implications are not pursued far, and the mind settles easily into whatever is directly in front of it. For your mind, the fringe is dense. Every thought arrives with an unusually rich network of implications already attached: related scenarios, possible consequences, alternative interpretations, emotional undertones that others would never register. You are not imagining more than is there. You are perceiving more of what is actually there. The problem is not the perception. The problem is that all of it arrives at once, with no hierarchy, no filter, and no exit. This is the mechanism behind the loop. Rumination is not a thinking problem. It is a structural problem. The stream is moving, the fringe is dense, but there is no destination. James was precise about this. The stream always flows toward what he called substantive conclusions, resting points where a train of thought arrives somewhere and stops long enough to become usable. Without a destination, the stream does not stop. It circles. The richness that makes your mind an asset becomes the same richness that traps it, because every thought generates 10 more, and none of them converge. What this means practically is that the solution is never less thought. It is a destination. Give the stream somewhere to arrive, and the same density of connection that currently exhausts you begins doing something else entirely. It starts mapping terrain that other minds cannot even see. The next question is how? And the answer begins with understanding the difference between the two modes your mind is already capable of operating in, and why you have been stuck in the wrong one. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. You have felt both, even if you have never had words for the distinction. One leaves you exactly where you started, only more tired. The other moves. Rumination has a texture. It is circular, urgent, and oddly repetitive. The same scenario replayed with minor variations. The same fear approached from slightly different angles. The same conversation reconstructed and reconstructed without ever reaching a verdict. It feels like thinking because it is effortful and consuming. But effort is not the same as progress, and consumption is not the same as production. What rumination actually is, in James's terms, is associative thought without abstraction. The mind moving from one concrete to the next, pulled by emotional charge rather than by logic, never pausing long enough on any element to extract what is actually essential about it. James was specific about what separates this from reasoning proper. In the Principles of Psychology, he described genuine reasoning as requiring what he called sagacity, the ability to look at a concrete situation and identify which of its attributes is actually the one that matters. Not the whole thing, in its overwhelming totality. One part, the essential part. From that part, consequences can be drawn that would be invisible to anyone who stayed at the level of the concrete. This is what allows a good reasoner, James wrote, to be dropped into a situation they have never encountered before and still find their way through it, because they are not dependent on past experience with that exact scenario. They can break the situation apart, find the load-bearing element, and reason forward from there. The overthinker in rumination mode is doing the opposite. They are staring at the situation as a whole, feeling its full weight, registering every possible implication simultaneously, and becoming paralyzed by the totality of it. The mind keeps circling because it has never stopped long enough on any single element to ask, what is actually the thing I need to think about here? What is the one attribute of this situation that, if I understood it clearly, would make everything else navigable? Here is how to make that shift in real time. When you notice the loop starting, the same thought returning for the third or fourth time, the same scenario running again without resolution, stop and ask a single question. What am I actually trying to figure out? Not what am I worried about? Not what could go wrong? What specific question, if answered, would make this loop unnecessary? Name it in one sentence. This forces the mind to do what James described, to move from the overwhelming concrete to the abstracted essential. The loop does not survive that question. It either transforms into a line of actual inquiry, or it reveals itself as something that was never a thinking problem to begin with, which is its own useful piece of information. The difference between the person destroyed by their own mind and the person powered by it is not intelligence. It is this move, made consistently until it becomes the default. And it starts with understanding what your attention has been doing without your permission. My experience is what I agree to attend to. James wrote this in The Principles of Psychology, and it is one of the most quietly devastating sentences in the history of psychology. Not because it is complicated, because of what it implies about the life you have been living. Attention, in James's framework, is not a passive receiver, it is a selector. Out of the infinite stream of information available at any moment, sensory, emotional, conceptual, your attention picks what enters your experience and discards the rest. What it selects becomes real to you. What it ignores might as well not exist. This means that the contents of your inner life are not determined by what is happening around you. They are determined by what your attention has learned to reach for. And if your attention has been trained through years of anxiety and hypervigilance to reach for threats, gaps, worst-case scenarios, and unresolved questions, then that is the world you have been living in, not because it is the only world available, because it is the one your attention keeps building. The overthinker's attention is not weak. It is extraordinarily powerful, and it has been aimed at the wrong targets. This is the distinction James drew between two modes of sustained attention. Passive attention, where the object itself is so compelling that the mind is held without effort, and active attention, where the will directs the focus deliberately against the pull of whatever the mind would drift toward on its own. Most overthinking is passive attention operating at full intensity. Something feels threatening, unresolved, or important, and the mind locks onto it the way a heat-seeking missile locks onto a signal. It is not a choice. It is a reflex. And reflexes, without intervention, repeat indefinitely. Active attention is the intervention. It is not suppression, not the exhausting effort to stop thinking about something. It is redirection, consciously choosing what question to bring into focus, what problem to aim the mind's intensity toward, and holding it there long enough for the stream to do what it is actually capable of doing. James was clear that this faculty, the ability to bring a wandering attention back deliberately, again and again, is what he called the very root of judgment, character, and will. Not a minor skill, the foundational one. The practice is simpler than it sounds and more demanding than it looks. When you feel the attention pulling toward a loop, toward a threat, toward a scenario that has already been examined 20 times without resolution, name where it is going. Out loud or on paper, my attention is moving toward X, then name where you want it to go instead. The question I actually need to think about is why. This is not positive thinking. It is attention management, the same cognitive redirection that James identified as the difference between a mind that produces and a mind that merely reacts. Your attention is one of the sharpest instruments in the room. The question is whether you are holding it or it is holding you. What makes this redirection possible at scale, not just in a single moment of awareness, but as a sustained practice, is the tool the next part covers. Because active attention needs somewhere to land, and the most reliable place you can build for it is outside your own head. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. The mind that thinks in loops is not thinking badly. It is thinking without a surface. Consider what actually happens when an intense thought has nowhere to go. It returns. Not because your brain is broken, not because you lack discipline, but because the stream James described has a specific architectural need. It requires a destination, a place where the fringe of each thought can settle into something stable enough to examine. When that destination exists only inside your head, the stream circles back on itself, because the same neural conditions that generated the thought the first time generate it again and again, with minor variations, each pass adding anxiety rather than clarity. The loop is not a failure of intelligence. It is intelligence without an external anchor. This is where writing enters. Not journaling in the therapeutic sense, not processing emotions onto a page, but something more structural and more immediately useful. James observed that verbal thought is the fastest and most malleable mode of cognition available to the human mind. Words, he noted, are rapidly revivable. They can be summoned and recombined with a speed and flexibility that visual or tactile thinking cannot match. But verbal thought has a liability. It needs a substantive conclusion to stop moving. Without one, it keeps generating transitions, keeps finding the next association, keeps following the fringe of each idea into the next idea indefinitely. What writing does is force the conclusion. The moment you put a thought on paper, you have made it external, fixed, and therefore examinable in a way that internal thought never is. You can look at it. You can argue with it. You can see whether it actually holds together or whether it only felt coherent because it was moving too fast to inspect. The overthinker who writes is not doing something softer than the overthinker who doesn't. They are doing something harder. They are forcing their stream to produce output instead of circulation. And the output, once visible, does something that no amount of internal processing can replicate. It reveals the structure of the loop. When you write down what you are actually thinking, not what you wish you were thinking, not a cleaned-up version of the anxiety, but the raw, recursive content of the loop, you will almost always find that it is smaller than it felt. Not simpler, necessarily, but bounded. It has edges, and things with edges can be navigated. The practice has a specific form. It is not free writing, and it is not a to-do list. It is what you might call a map of relations, a direct application of what James meant by the fringe. When a thought is looping, you write the thought at the center of a page, and then you write every relation that thought is pulling toward, what it implies, what it is afraid of, what question it is really asking, what it assumes is true that might not be. You are not trying to resolve anything yet. You are making the fringe visible. You are taking what exists as a dense, fast-moving cloud of felt relations inside the stream and converting it into something you can read, something with a shape. Once you can see the shape, you can see where the loop is actually stuck, which specific relation it keeps returning to, which assumption it cannot get past, which question it has been circling without ever directly asking. And a question that has been directly asked is already halfway answered because it can now be aimed at. James described the stream as always flowing toward its most interesting object, the thing that holds what he called the fringe of felt affinity. For the overthinker without an external surface, the most interesting object is almost always the unresolved threat, because unresolved threats have the densest fringe of all. Everything connects to them. They generate the most associations, the most implications, the most emotional charge. Writing changes the hierarchy. When the threat is on paper, when it has been made specific, bounded, and legible, it loses the ambient omnipresence that made it so magnetically compelling inside the stream. It becomes one object among others, rather than the gravitational center of everything. And the mind, freed from its orbit, can begin to move in a different direction. This is not a permanent solution performed once and finished. It is a practice, something done at the moment the loop starts, not after it has been running for 2 hours. The earlier in the cycle you externalize, the less momentum the loop has built, and the faster the stream finds a new direction. Over time, the act of reaching for the page becomes itself a signal to the mind. This thought is being handled. It does not need to repeat. And a mind that knows its thoughts are being handled is a mind that can finally and productively move on. What it moves toward next is the question the following part answers, because externalizing the loop is only half the conversion. The other half is learning to use the specific capacity your mind has been developing all along, the one that looks like a liability and is actually the rarest cognitive asset in the room. Most people, when faced with a complex problem, pick an angle and stay there. They find the most obvious frame, the one that matches what they already know, the one that requires the least reconstruction, and they work from inside it until they reach a conclusion or give up. This is efficient. It is also the reason most people's solutions look exactly like everyone else's solutions. Your mind does not do this. It cannot. The same density of fringe that generates the loop also prevents you from settling into a single frame without immediately feeling the pull of the others. You see the situation from one angle, and you are already aware of how it looks from three more. You reach a tentative conclusion, and you are already generating the counterarguments. This has been presented to you as a deficiency, an inability to commit, to decide, to stop second-guessing. It is not. It is the most sophisticated form of perception that James identified in his entire taxonomy of mind. In the Principles of Psychology, James wrote that genius, at its core, means little more than the faculty of perceiving in an unhabitual way. Not superior processing speed, not a larger store of knowledge. The ability to look at something everyone else has looked at and see it differently. To resist the pull of the obvious frame long enough for a less obvious one to become visible. This is precisely what the overthinker's mind does naturally, involuntarily, and at volume. The problem is not the capacity. The problem is that it has been running without a target. Perceiving in an unhabitual way is only an asset when it is aimed. Directionless, it produces what you already know. The sensation of seeing too many sides of everything, of being unable to land anywhere, of watching your own analysis multiply until the original question disappears beneath the weight of its implications. But aimed, given a specific problem, a specific decision, a specific question that needs something more than the obvious answer, it becomes the thing that separates insight from opinion, anticipation from worry, depth from noise. Here is the concrete method. When you face a decision or a problem that matters, do not begin by trying to reach a conclusion. Begin by deliberately generating frames. Ask, how would someone who stands to lose from this situation see it? How would someone with no emotional investment see it? How would this look in 5 years rather than 5 days? What would have to be true for the opposite of my instinct to be correct? You are not doing this to confuse yourself further. You are doing it to use what your mind already does involuntarily, inhabiting multiple perspectives simultaneously, as a controlled instrument rather than an uncontrolled reflex. The difference between the overthinker paralyzed by multiple perspectives and the strategic thinker empowered by them is simply whether the perspectives are being generated on purpose toward a specific end. James was precise about what happens when this capacity is disciplined. He described the reasoner's great advantage as the ability to deal with what he called novel data, situations for which no existing habit of thought provides a ready answer. The linear mind, confronted with genuine novelty, gets stuck. It reaches for the nearest familiar frame and forces the new situation into it, even when the fit is poor. The mind that can inhabit multiple frames simultaneously does not need to force anything. It holds the situation lightly enough, from enough angles, that the frame which actually fits tends to become visible, not through effort, but through the patience of sustained, multi-perspectival attention. This is the rarest thing in any room. Not the person with the fastest answer, but the person who can hold a problem long enough, from enough angles, to arrive at the answer no one else could have reached. That person is not someone who thinks less than you. They are someone who learned to use what you already have. And what keeps that capacity sharp, what prevents the multi-perspectival mind from collapsing back into paralysis, is the last thing this video covers, a reckoning with the nature of the mind you actually have and what it means to stop apologizing for it. James did not romanticize the intense mind. He described it with clinical precision, and what he described was this: the difference between the person whose attention feels sustained and the person whose attention feels scattered is not willpower. It is whether the objects of thought form a series connected by rational law, or a series with no bond at all. In the first case, each thought opens naturally into the next, and the mind follows without effort. In the second, every thought is an island, and the attention exhausts itself jumping between them. You have been living in the second case, not because your mind is incapable of the first, but because no one told you that the series needs to be constructed, that it does not emerge on its own from the sheer force of thinking hard, that the channel has to be dug before the river can move in a straight line. This is the thing that does not get said about overthinking. The people who have converted it into a genuine advantage are not people who think differently than you do. They are people who learned, usually through accident or necessity, to give their thinking a structure it was never going to find on its own. They found the problem specific enough to grip them. They built the habit of externalizing before the loop closed. They aimed the multi-perspectival perception at a target, instead of letting it rotate in open air. The cognitive raw material is the same. The architecture around it is not. James wrote, without sentimentality, that genius means little more than the faculty of perceiving in an unhabitual way. He did not say it was comfortable. He did not say it made life easier. He said it was a faculty, something that could be used or not used, depending entirely on whether it was ever aimed at anything. You already have the faculty. What you do not yet have, or have only in pieces, is the habit of aiming it. And habits, James was at pains to explain in the chapter that opens his entire book, are not character. They are grooves worn into the nervous system by repetition, which means they can be worn differently, which means the mind you have right now, with all its intensity and all its noise, is not the finished version of anything. It is the uncut version. If this video resonated with you, the one showing up on your screen right now will too. Click to keep watching.